It's entitled The Resurrection. The resurrection is a description of how the universe self-corrects, life always reasserting itself even when forces of death and darkness have temporarily prevailed, like a tiny flower growing through cracks in broken cement, peace of mind emerging at last after periods of deep grief, or people continuing to fall in love despite the ravages of war. Love always gets the final say. To lean on the resurrection is simply to recognize what's true, that if happiness hasn't arrived yet, then the story isn't over. As I watch the news every night, and I see what's happening in Ukraine, and it's heartbreaking what's going on, and it's hard to think about resurrection and Easter in light of so much pain in the world. And I'm going to try to address that in the sermon, but just want to acknowledge the struggle of so many valiant people who are doing extraordinary things. I have a little bit of a story to share in a minute about the Ukrainian eggs as acts of resistance. It was a wonderful article and video in the Washington Post this morning. And I hope to share the video with you, but it's protected and I can't share it on a screen, unfortunately. But I'll show you the picture and I'll read you an excerpt from the article. It's just such a beautiful and powerful story of resistance and courage. So much courage. And when we did our Ukrainian offering, we were able to raise over $2,000, right?
Over $2,200.
Over $2,200. You guys are awesome. Let's think of ways that we can continue to help them moving forward. You guys are familiar with the Ukrainian eggs, I'm sure. Yeah. The art that goes into them is just extraordinary. They call them Pysanki, Pysanki. One legend about Pysanki eggs tells of them having the power to keep evil from destroying the world. There's a legend that Stephanie Cheeseman grew up hearing about Ukrainian eggs that she has thought about often lately. In it, an evil creature is held back from destroying the world by chains that bind it to a cliff. Whether that creature remains restrained and the world at peace is up to humanity. The strength of those chains is tied to the number of Ukrainian eggs people make. More eggs, and they tighten. Less eggs, and they loosen. I know it's just a legend, Cheeseman tells me on a recent evening. I know it's just a story, but there's something profound there to me. She heard that legend from her mother, who heard it from her mother. And on a Saturday in March, Cheeseman shared it with a room full of people who attended a workshop in Virginia to learn how to make these elaborately decorated eggs, which are called Pysanki. We need to make as many as we can because so many people are displaced and cannot make any this year. Cheeseman told those who were gathered on that day, if this legend holds true, then it's our job to make as many as we can to keep evil at bay. After Russia invaded Ukraine, Cheeseman knew she couldn't do much from Northern Virginia, but she also knew she couldn't do nothing. Her late grandparents on her mother's side were both Ukrainian, and her grandfather grew up there. The family still has relatives who live in western Ukraine. They have been converting a school into a shelter to house people who have been forced to flee the dangerous areas. Realizing Easter was approaching, she sent an email to the Holy Cross Episcopal Church in Dunn, Loring, and asked if she could hold a Pysanki workshop. She had held a workshop in the past, but this time, she explained, she wanted to use the event to raise money that would go towards aiding Ukrainians. Each time has felt very important, but this year felt urgent to me, she says. I wanted to do something to help, and that was the only way I know how to help. And just one more paragraph. Pysanki eggs are intricate displays of patience and creativity. They take time and care, especially since fire is involved, to complete. A person just has to glance at them to see that. But people who have embraced the art, either as part of their heritage or as a discovered interest, also know this. There are layers of symbolism involved in creating them. The designs are written with beeswax, not painted, and each egg tells a story. Everything from the colors of the dyes to the images depicted hold meaning. One shape might be a plea for fertility, and another for a prayer for protection. Creating these eggs has definitely taken on a new significance for me, Diane Small says. I am not Ukrainian, but this art form has brought so much to my life. I felt like I had to do something to help and support Ukraine. I'm in a lovely community of Pisanki artists, and we're all trying to do our part. And the practice of creating these Pisanki eggs, of writing them, not drawing them, it's the same thing that the Eastern Orthodox Church in Ukraine and around the world, that's how they describe doing the what are the pictures of the saints?
Icons.
The icons, yes. They talk about, they don't draw icons, they write icons. And the writing of the icon is a prayer. And the same thing is true for the Pisanki eggs. And so in honor of our brothers and sisters in Ukraine and those of Ukrainian descent, some of whom are here this morning, we hold our hearts open for you. And we continue to want to find ways in which we can support Ukraine and to overcome this evil with good. So the title of the sermon that I've taken for today is simply Love Wins. Love Wins. And I'm going to unpack that. But first let me talk about the story of Easter, the story of resurrection. The dating of Easter has always been kind of fascinating to me. For the Western Church, Easter falls on the first Sunday after the first full moon following the vernal equinox. So the vernal equinox was March 20th. The first full moon was last night, and so today's Easter. Isn't that interesting? It's different every year. And it's different for the Eastern Church, too. They're a week later than us. And at the outset, I want to acknowledge that Easter is sometimes a challenge for Unitarian Universalists. Nan and I were talking this morning about the triumphant Easter hymn that, Presbyterians and Episcopalians and Methodists sing today. Jesus Christ is risen today. Pum, 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 pum. And then you get the horn section out. It's triumphant and glorious. But Easter is a little bit of a question mark for us because of our commitment to rational discourse and science and all that. We celebrate Christmas because that's about birth, right? And there's no good reason to deny that. We acknowledge Good Friday because that's when Jesus died. We all will die, so nothing too extraordinary about that except the fact, the horror of the way that Jesus died. But Easter, well, it reminds me of one of my favorite stories. It's a story told by a Unitarian Universalist minister, of course, and you'll see why as I share it. It's a story about a teacher who was asked a question about Easter. A teacher who was asked a question about Easter by one of her students. And in her 4th grade classroom, the teacher, Mrs. Rogers, turned the question on the students, instead of asking them what they thought Easter meant. And the young students were asked to tell her what the meaning of Easter is. The hand of the little Episcopalian boy shot up in the air. I know, he said confidently. Easter is when we put up a pine tree and decorate it with lights and wrap presents for each other and sing lullabies to baby Jesus. No, said the teacher. You got Easter confused with Christmas. Does anyone else know? Little Roman Catholic girl's hand shot up. Easter is when you fill the house with the smell of turkey cooking and watch football and give thanks for all the relatives who've come for dinner. No, Mrs. Rogers said. Surely someone must understand the meaning of Easter. And as I said, this is a story told by a Unitarian Universalist minister. And finally, you guessed it, The little Unitarian Universalist kid in the class raises her hand. Easter is when we remember that after a 3-year ministry among the Judean people, Jesus rode triumphantly into Jerusalem on the back of a donkey. He was put on trial by the Roman authorities for being a troublemaker, and he was crucified on a hill between 2 thieves. And finally, he was buried in a cave. Yes, finally, that's right, Susie, said the teacher, visibly relieved. But then Susie continued, and when he comes out of the cave, if he sees his shadow, there'll be 6 more weeks of winter. Well, I hope Jesus does not see his shadow, because I'm done with winter. There have been so many curious traditions that have grown up around Easter, right? In fact, Easter is a derivative of the more ancient pagan ceremonies called Eostre, the name from which we get Easter. It's about a Germanic goddess of the east and of springtime, the goddess of dawn. Eostre in the ancient pagan world was the embodiment of joy, representing new life coming from spring, fertility. And what represents fertility more in the world than what? A rabbit? Yes. And colored eggs? Yes. We told our grandchildren yesterday that the eggs in our coop have been missing this week, and I saw a rabbit in there, and they went, no! They're still young. I only have a little while longer to enjoy this. Yeah. So, Easter, resurrection. You know, one of the ways that I love to think about this idea of resurrection, of eternal spring, of love coming again and emerging anew in the aftermath of winter, is embodied in the story, and I've shared this before, but it's one of my favorite stories about the Methodist bishop in the 19th century was visiting one of his congregations, and there was a controversy raging at the time in the congregation. Divided down the middle was the congregation over the issue of baptism. Should infants be baptized, or should we wait until they understand what it's about to let them make a profession of faith and then baptize them? And so, you know, there was this mixed opinion in the congregation. Some felt that infants didn't understand it enough, so they should wait until they're older and make a choice for themselves. And the other side believed that, well, there's no real reason to be outside of the embrace of God's love. And so we should acknowledge in baptism what's already happening, you know. And so the bishop shows up that morning, and immediately he is accosted. And he says, and the person says to him, "Bishop, do you believe in infant baptism?" And with a quizzical look on his face, the bishop just stammered his reply. "Believe in it? Heck, I've seen it done. I've seen it. I've seen it done. I've seen it happen before." Any one of us who is connected with the recovery community of AA or ACOA or NA, any of the recovery communities, can tell you that resurrection happens every day, because I've seen it with my own eyes. I've seen lives turn around because of people being able to overcome the challenges they're facing. Anyone recovering from a near-fatal car accident can tell you that resurrection happens in the aftermath of a long healing process, and one is able to reclaim her life. And anyone who is blessed, like I am, with a new loving relationship after a painful divorce can tell you that resurrection happens and that love wins. That's what Easter is about. It's about the promise of new beginnings, the promise of new life after a tragedy, and new beginnings after mistakes, in short, of wins. So where does this phrase come from? In 2012, the evangelical author Rob Bell unleashed a storm in the evangelical world with the publication of his internationally acclaimed book, Love Wins. The subtitle is A Book About Heaven, Hell, and the Fate of Every Person Who Ever Lived. You know, the only problem I have with Rob Bell is he just has no ambition to articulate challenging things. A book about heaven, hell, and the fate of every person who's ever lived. But the long and the short of it is this. He puts hell on trial, and he says, as Unitarians have been saying from the start, that a loving God would not condemn someone to eternal damnation in a place called hell. Episcopalians really don't even believe in hell, most of them. And we believe in hell in that we have seen people who are living in hell, but it's not a place where they're going to go to after they die and rot, and all those terrible images that I grew up with in my Southern Baptist upbringing. Yeah, a loving God is not going to condemn someone to a place like that. So Rob Bell makes this assertion, and he gets like excommunicated from the evangelical world because this is a very controversial position, but it's true. It's true. The good news of the life of Jesus is that love, not hate, is the guiding principle of the universe. Love, not judgment, is the calling of faith communities like us. Love, not cynicism, is our reason for being and our mission in the world. Julie Peters writes in her article, The Spiritual Meaning of the Easter Season, that regardless of what traditions you follow, the spiritual meaning of Easter is that a new light comes after the sacrifice of tribulation. There's this beautiful prayer in the Episcopal prayer book about the church. And an excerpt of it is, let the whole world see and know that things which were being cast down are being raised up, and things which had grown old are being made new. Love wins. Some of you know the work of Reverend William Barber, one of the bright lights here in North Carolina, and he's the chairman of the National Poor People's Campaign, a successor, literally, to Dr. King. Dr. Martin Luther King, and he often will use this phrase, love wins, and then he follows it by saying, well, if love isn't winning, we haven't gotten to the end of the story yet. And that's where we are today. Okay. I think that's where we are today. How do we participate in love winning as a Unitarian fellowship? The second principle, justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. The sixth principle, the goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. The seventh principle, respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. Observing and acting on these principles is us participating in love winning the world. Practicing these guiding principles empowers us to put love into action. Because of this, because of the love and compassion and mercy of courageous people all over the world, love will win in Ukraine. Love will win in Palestine. This is a picture of a friend of ours. His name is Martin Joseph. He's an internationally acclaimed folk singer. He's standing at the wall in Palestine. Someone painted "Love Wins" even there. We went with him. Love is winning. We've got a long way to go. As Dr. King said, you know, the arc of the universe is justice. It bends towards justice, but it's a long arc. But each one of us playing our part, doing our thing, participating in courageous acts of love in the world, help bend that arc towards justice. And since it doesn't appear that love is winning in many places on the earth, that means the story is not finished yet. And that means that you and I have work to do. We have money to raise, we have cards and letters to write, we have flowers to grow and share, we have phone calls to make. As a fellowship, as individuals, there are many ways we can participate in love's winning the day, and that's our call. So happy Easter, dear friends. Happy day of resurrection. Believe in it. If we're honest, heck, we've seen it done. May the beauties of this spring season and the promise of new beginnings fill your hearts and the hearts of those whom you love with joy and delight this Easter day, this Easter season. Now, I want to say a little bit about the flowers on the altar. These flowers are for us to take home, and I invite you to take one with you. If you're coming to the restaurant afterwards, you can take it from there. We'll bring them there as well. This is a ritual that was created by a Unitarian Universalist minister in Czechoslovakia in 1923, after the tragedy of the First World War and the devastating ruins of that. He thought, well, there's something we need to do to acknowledge the beauty in nature, and he started this idea of a flower communion where people would bring from their gardens flowers to share. So the idea is that you bring the flower and you take a different flower home so that you're kind of commingling flowers. We didn't give you an advance notice, and it's still early for flowers, so we brought the flowers today. But we want you to take a flower home. I want you to look at its beauty, at its intricacy, at its delicacy, and just meditate on its exquisite beauty. Breathe in that beauty, and let that beauty inspire you to participate in love's winning the day. And also, we have another opportunity for us. And I'm going to ask Maria if she would say a little bit about it. Is this okay?
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, I have an invitation for all of you. I love that Lyndon's going to talk about love winning. And I believe that it takes just one act to change darkness to light. So what I did was I put some cards on the table over there underneath the poster that says How I Made Love Win. So I'm inviting everybody to take a card, and over the next week, or if you're feeling froggy, you can take several cards, but over the next couple of weeks to go and make love win somehow. And that can be an act toward a person, toward an animal, toward a tree, it could be anything. But something that you do to bring light to something from your heart that can change the world. You know, I believe that, like the woman in Virginia, we can't all be in Ukraine and do something. We can't all do something for the people that are hurting, but we can do something that changes something. So that's the invitation. And if you'll bring them back next time and lay them on the table, we won't be here, but lay them on the table so that people can see what you did. Sure. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that. And if you want to do it anonymously, feel free to do that as well. Yeah, it's just an idea to be intentional about finding ways to practice those random acts of kindness, or those intentional acts of kindness, those premeditated acts of kindness, any act of kindness and love you can think about that'll help make a difference in the world. Okay, let's do our closing, and then I invite you to have a robust conversation. We extinguish the flame of this chalice. Let us follow the light of truth until we meet again. Amen. Thank you. So what are your thoughts? What are your responses? Do you have any anecdotes or stories that relate that you'd like to share? Yes, Nan.
I found that through love, we can overcome things that happen to us that are terrifying and wonderful. And that's the way life is sometimes.
Yeah.
And you just have to take the love and make it happen.
That's beautiful. Overcoming the terrifying and the wonderful, which is kind of the same stuff of human existence, isn't it? Thank you for that. Yeah. Yes, Marie.
I had the chance to go and see the movie Cable last night.
Okay.
I'm glad I did, because in the darkness of all that's happening, it is actually about loving your family and feeling responsible for them. And how a young girl who's 17, who is the only hearing person in her family.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, it is an absolutely lovely movie about loving and making a difference. It is a beautiful thing. I'm sure you can see it on TV through some website, if you cannot go and see it on a movie theater. It is really a perfect thing for Easter.
Oh, what a great idea. I saw that it won Best Picture at the Academy Awards this year. I really want to see it. Thank you for that. Yeah. What else? Yes?
Years ago, I was told that anger is a secondary emotion and that fear comes first. And over the years, I've tested that, and I've never found it not to be true. So anytime I feel anger, I ask myself, why, who hurt me, or why am I feeling hurt?
Yeah. That's beautiful. So that you can understand it and move from fear to love. I love that. Thank you for that. Yes, Paul.
Love wins is a challenge, you know.
It's a challenge.
To maybe, you know, we think action, this thought and action.
Yeah.
And I say to myself, well, what, you know, what can generate the right frame of mind to do positive things, you know, to acts of kindness, or let's say an attitude adjustment. And I thought, like, geez, you know, if I could just be a decent person, you know, a decent, rational, tolerant person, that's a good start.
That's a good start. Thank you. That's beautiful. That's Gandhi's idea, to be the peace we wish to see in the world. And when we are that peace, then the ripple effects can be significant. Yeah. Thank you for that. Yeah.
I think love is not only a challenge, but love is a support. And I know we all heard that term, loving unconditionally.
Yeah.
And many of us have seen, and may even be ourselves, have been resurrected in whatever format and stumbled and fallen back down again. And it's love wins that picks that person up or picks yourself up in almost every single case. So love is really a great supporting tool.
Yeah.
Unconditional.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Nick. Love is a verb.
Yeah.
It's an action. Yeah. Yeah.
I think we should love the Russians and not just the Ukrainians, because most Russians don't love war any more than
Right.
not war.
Right.
More than we do.
Yeah. Amen to that. Amen to that. What's the fear and what's the anger and yeah.
I think that the manifestation of love for me that I've come to realize is the most important is listening. Taking the time to listen to somebody who needs to be listened to. You know, we're all so busy, it's so easy to brush things off, say, oh, I'm sorry, I've got to do this, I've got to do that. But you can save people's lives by listening to them, and that's an act of love. Even if you don't like them, it's still an act of love.
You can still listen, and actively listen. Yeah. Wow, that is so true. One of the great theologians of the 20th century, Paul Tillich, said that to love is to listen. And that's what love is listening. And the corollary is something that Dr. King said, and that is that violence is the language of the unheard. So in our listening, we love people into and beyond a state of violent reaction. Thank you for that. Yeah, what else? You guys some great comments this morning. I appreciate it. Sermon is like a dance, you know. We're partners.
Well, you're a good dancer.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Okay.
Well, I think I've found that even when people are upset or angry or, acting out, that the best way to diffuse that is listening, smiling, loving them, accepting them. What can they do back?
Right. Yeah, it's really unsettling if you're like full of anger and you're lashing out at someone. They go, "Tell me about that." You know, that sounds really terrible. And just active listening. Yeah, so true. Yeah, and I think about your illustration early on, Jim, about the American tennis players going over before the match and hugging the Ukrainian players. That itself is a kind of message that I hear you and that we're with you. And that's really what it's all about, is letting people know that we're with them and that they're not alone and we're not alone and we're kind of in this game together, in this gifted realm, this grand experience of life together to create something beautiful. Yeah, love wins. Let's make it so.